So thank,
Yay. I can't.
yeah, I just want to start by thanking the tech team for arranging this special setting for us. So thank you guys. And yeah, let's kick it off, Indy.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for letting this happen. I've shared my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes,
Yes?
yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, excellent. Yay, good, good. So what I want to talk about today is about measuring value for people. I think that's a really important thing. And Augusto and I have known each other for a couple of years now, and this is incredibly, deeply important to him as well. And what we're going to do is converse a little bit about some of the points so that he can help us understand how it might work within your organization. So first, I want to get started with a story. And this is a story about a study that I did for a client. It was a small fund that helped local founders and entrepreneurs. The whole aim of this was to help close racial and gender wealth gaps within that region. And they had an existential question when they called me up. They said, you know, we know how to measure all these things about the difference that we're making, but we don't know how to measure whether we're providing value to the people that we support, to those founders. And the reason we want to do that is because there are a lot of investors that are interested in this fund, but not all of them actually invest. And if we can show them proof that we are actually realizing our mission, then there's a greater chance that we'll have more investors. So what I did was I framed a study, and the study was with founders, and I wanted to find out everything that went through their mind as they were working on challenges at their business. The idea was to try to get at their interior cognition in areas where they might have been making decisions or reaching out for help to various advisors and mentors and even people at the fund, because the fund also helps them. And so I asked them one germinal question: what went through your mind as you addressed a challenge in the business that you have built? And we had a listening session. Now, a listening session is different than an interview. It just starts with that germinal question, and I follow what people have to say. And I just wrote a book about it. This illustration is from the book. And what I help people do is get past the explanations of what and how and why, and get to their interior cognition about each topic that they bring up. The interior cognition is inner thinking, emotional reactions, and guiding principles. And then we get a bunch of transcripts. I go through those transcripts and I pull out every single concept that is an inner thinking, an emotional reaction, or a guiding principle, and I summarize these concepts. And I do a kind of synthesis. Instead of analysis, I'm doing bottom-up emergent work to try to preserve this interior thinking. I don't want to put my own understanding or the fund's understanding on this data. And so interestingly, patterns emerge, and we use people's focus of mental attention to help them emerge. You see here kind of 3 lines that look like a whole bunch of towers. Those, it's only 3 lines because I had to fit it on one slide. It's too long. But these towers contain each of those bits of interior cognition. So that's what founders are thinking. And emergent means that these towers also form themselves into blocks, like a city block. You can see kind of these narrow white stripes between the blocks. And those, I kind of use a city analogy that helps us understand what we're looking at. I want to give you an example of what some of those blocks were. Like, I'm considering starting a business, or I'm trying to convince myself to do it. I have to hire the right people for the right roles, do the business plan, make the product correctly, prevent the investors from changing our product direction, struggle with the stress of business, build mental clarity and peace, try to find the right people to network with for funding, get a read on this investor as a possible match, and figure out how to continue without raising funds. Those were very interesting to my client. And these blocks built themselves into neighborhoods, much like a city builds itself into neighborhoods over time. Now, these neighborhoods are not chronological. It's just mental spaces that people are in, where they are focused cognitively. And we all know that we, can focus on one thing one moment and then another thing a couple hours later, and then go back to that other thing a day or two later. So this is not a sequence of steps like a journey map. It has nothing to do with anybody's product. This is only about the entrepreneur's interior cognition. So we had a neighborhood about build the business and the product. We had a neighborhood about ensuring pride in our work, a neighborhood about shape myself into a better founder, and the one that was interesting to the fund, arrange funding. Now, the other thing that came out of this same data was thinking styles. So the thinking styles that emerged were three. And the three thinking styles were turn my idea into a business. It's like I'm an expert in this area and I had this amazing idea. And now I have to figure out how to make a business out of it. Grab an opportunity. This is the sort of typical founder that we think of. And this person is always looking for ideas. They're always going to run another business, spin another one up after one of them has finished. And they just love being in charge of the decisions and the details and everything. So that's what we were finding out of the thinking styles. And the thinking styles were then layered onto those towers. So all those colors in the towers represent different thinking styles for each of the interior cognition. There's 3 colors plus a couple other colors when they overlap. And what we did with the fund was we took all of their capabilities and aligned them underneath the tower that they support. So yes, they had a lot of support under the funding, especially helping their founders pitch to the investors. They also had a lot of support in how to build a business and how to become a better founder and that sort of thing. So what was interesting was that we found some issues in that pitching. So we do something called gap analysis. We found 2 big gaps. Some gaps you can see are intentional, but other gaps where there's nothing underneath the tower is where we want to actually support them, are where we were looking. So the prepare my pitch one, all of the founders are saying, hey, if you want to be an inclusive funder, why are you asking us to do this really hyped, urgent pitch to investors? Because that is their language. That is not our language. So we needed to fix that. The fund is all like, there is an opportunity here to be different. And the other kind of gap over on the right is where we only supported one of those 3 thinking styles, but all 3 thinking styles were present. So we addressed these 2 things. We also were able to talk, or they were able to talk about how successful they are helping their founders with finding the network. Because so many other funders just remain hidden, this fund actually goes out into the communities and looks for people. So that was a big highlight. And now we had these 3 points that we could talk to investors about as proof of the fact that we were building our mission, working on our mission. So,
yeah.
Augusto.
So when we were talking about preparing the presentation, I offer Indi to make some comments on the things that I see being her student and also being a practitioner, right? So that is where I'm coming from. And here, what I wanted to reflect a little bit on is on the fact that we as designers, as developers, as researchers, we have so many models, so many different ways to map experiences and to create artifacts that represent the humans we support, and then the experiences we intend to come to produce, that why another one, right? So why introducing a mental model diagram into the universe of tools that we are already using? So in this context, I decided to throw in on the slide some of the most frequently used models we use, which are personas and journey maps. And personas, I'm happy to say that Susanne has taken them down like 2 talks ago, so I don't have to say it in those words. But what I want to say about personas is that a quick search online will actually tell you how they are being used as a tool. So you can find a lot of personas online, as an example, which are rife with demographic information, with stereotypical photos, or even with some quirky information blocks, like preferred payment option, which has nothing to do with the people themselves, which is something super contextual, and speaks more to the business we are trying to create, not that the people we want to serve. And then there's the case of journey maps. I think journey maps also introduce a different take. And I was reflecting a lot on the chronology of the journey map, right? So my question to you as practitioners, have you ever reflected on what defines those steps of the journey map? So if you think for a second, you will, in most cases, see that you are mapping the steps of a customer. So you're already thinking about that person as a customer, not somebody who you want to support. So in most cases, also, you can see journey maps that are actually mapping a conversion funnel through which we want people to go through, instead of just depicting their experience, right? So my whole point here is to say that there is a lot of opportunity for bias to creep in, and for those artifacts to reassure the business we are working in about the wrong thing, right? And so in this context, in which tools can be a bit misleading, the ways in which mental model diagrams are actually built from the bottom up, as Indi was saying, is actually a way to maybe remove or maybe minimize bias to the most. And also, I found them very useful to facilitate the conversation shift, because it allows us to speak with our stakeholders and allow them to understand people more broadly and with more nuance. Yeah, back to you, Indi.
Okay. So yeah, the thing that and personas, right? I've got a whole other talk about that. But the trouble that we're facing, I think, is that most orgs still, let me actually share my screen. Oh no, I am sharing my screen. Okay. The trouble is that most orgs are still thinking in terms of their solution, like Augusto was saying. Oftentimes the mechanics of the solution become the front end or get like deliberately hidden, like in social media. And so it's up to the person who's trying to focus on something that they're doing to translate that solution into their purpose. Now, there's a great example of this, airline reservations. I did a 100-person study, and the people, the passengers, they're interested in their destination. They're interested in the people they're going to meet, the time they need to be there, the events they're going to do. They're not thinking about planes and airports, but that's all the airline tells them. We've got planes. They fly between airports. Have at it. There's a lot of extra work, unpaid labor, that a passenger has to do to figure out, well, which airport is closest? How long does it take? What if we get delayed? Am I still going to be able to make the event? I think a lot of you have just had these thoughts recently. So what's happening is that because of this, we need to focus on a person's purpose a little bit more clearly. Now, I want to define what I mean by purpose. You could use the word goal, and I think a lot of people have been using goal or objective or job and jobs to be done. And that's when you want to accomplish something or achieve something. But you might also want to just make progress on it. And you might want to make progress on it forever. You might actually be hesitating or not able to decide on it, or even trying to actively put it off. And that's what I'm trying to do with the word purpose. I'm trying to make it bigger. I'm trying to make it more inclusive. It's not just these things that you're going to do in an hour or a week, but something that might take a decade or a lifetime. It can be really anything. So let me give you an example. This illustration is of a caretaker taking care of their parent when their parent cannot walk temporarily. It's going to be a couple months maybe to get their parent back into the way that they can take care of their own life. But in the meantime, this caretaker is going to be in charge of a lot of things with regard to their parent. So they're going to be helping their parent do the physical therapy. They may be talking to the physical therapist when one of the exercises isn't working out. They're trying to celebrate some exercise that did work out by ordering the parent's favorite food and having it delivered, or keeping them entertained, picking up the prescription, making sure that they're paying for everything and arranging finance. And when they're keeping their parent entertained, maybe they're chatting with Tio Marco, and Tio Marco tells them the story about when that parent was young and a really bad drug interaction she had. So you, as a caretaker, you're going to call the doctor. Now, what kind of relationship do you have with the doctor? Will he listen to you and maybe prescribe a different medication because the one that she had a reaction to is on the list? And what's fun is that there are 3 thinking styles to this. Push past resistance. Come on, mom, you can do that physical therapy. Or give dignity and agency. Okay, so you had bad news today. Let's skip physical therapy, right? Or avoid the stew. It's like, okay, whatever, you don't want to do it. And these can change on a daily basis. The thinking styles are contextual. And even in the passenger example, thinking style changes based on the trip, the leg of the trip that you're taking. So what's interesting is when an organization is looking at trying to support someone only through the lens of their solution, they lose all this. So if their solution is a little health app that helps the caretaker figure out what meds need to be taken when and in how much and whether those were taken. And so they're asking the caretaker for needs and preferences and, what makes you frustrated about this app? And it's very focused on nobody, just like a mythical average user. It's normative, to use that word. There is no variety. And I know earlier that Laura Portman was talking about this, the need that we need to understand that there is variety out there and support that variety. She gave some examples of that. And this is one way to show people how to find the variety and understand it. So the single most important idea here is something you can take away. It's just a mindset shift. It's shifting your thinking about users from people in relationship to your solution to people who are addressing their purpose. Your solution is not in the picture. I mean, maybe it is, but it's one of many tools that the person uses. Augusto.
Yeah. So this point very nicely connects with Liam's point before. If you remember, he was talking about individual intent in interfaces and the factor that intent can be yet another human factor that we can design for beyond, vision, um, um, speech and cognition and environmental factors. The intent is also that we can also take into account when we are creating potential solutions. So here we were brainstorming a little bit with Indi about how AI could potentially work towards supporting intent.
Yeah. So I have been looking for someone to talk about the front end of an interaction to be supported by some sort of AI. And Liam started doing it. So Liam and I were chatting. I'm really excited about it because there are small models, ontological AI models, not these big LLMs that are just about conversation. They're small models that take into account a data set like the data set that I showed you in the example, the story up front, where they can go through that data set and understand the type of person that they're interacting with and help them then have an experience that is more keyed to their thinking style. So there's maybe behind it an idea of having, if we had 3 different thinking styles, having 3 general differences in the way that we would support someone that might have this built into that database. That AI might have some other database to look at in terms of the experiences of the wording and the tone of voice that it might want to use as people are interacting with it.
Right. But then here we are talking about offering custom solutions for a variety of thinking styles, as opposed to creating just one solution that applies to everybody. So the question here is, how do we know that all of those options we might be potentially generate actually have value for the people we intend to use them?
Yeah, that is a really good question. So the answer is kind of multi-layered, and I want to start with the first thing, which is value. A lot of us have assumptions about what value is, and even among team members, we may have different assumptions. So value is providing a way for a person to address their purpose in a way that is better for them. So they get to define their own better. And before you go like, oh my God, well, how do we know everybody's in the world's better? We do it the way that I've been talking about, by understanding people's interior cognition as they address their purpose in the past, understanding their inner thinking, their emotional reactions, their guiding principles as they made decisions. And by looking at that interior cognition and the patterns that come out of it, we understand what people are after, and we understand what they are missing and wanting. So what's interesting is that these patterns that show up, they are unique to the purpose and org, purpose plus org. I've had a lot of people say, well, why don't you just make one for bank and, publish it, and then all the banks will buy it. I'm like, well, different people go to different banks for different reasons. So let's get the interior cognition. I've done a lot of studies over time, and what I did was I kind of reviewed all the ways that people were finding value, and I made some category lists. The very first one here, it's all about having my thinking style supported. It's acknowledging my philosophy that I hold toward this purpose. Like, oh, you don't expect me to like fit into this other mold. It contributes, maybe allows me to contribute to a higher purpose, or do something else that I wanted to do, or support somebody else, or it's less stressful, or it doesn't trigger my horrible memories. Like you're asking me if I want to deliver a bouquet to my mother who has passed away. It avoids stealing my time, and it doesn't require me to provide unpaid labor like the passengers who are trying to make a reservation. So these are really important categories of value. Tech thinks of value in terms of what it can do. Tech provides something faster or easier or more scalable or more efficient. And that's been tech's glory. And in the beginning, yeah, a lot of people found those as values. Those would be really valuable to them to be able to do something at a scale. But those are not now things that I'm hearing in the interior cognition that I come across. So these faster, easier, scalable, more efficient are no longer the values that our teams need to come with in mind. We need to come in mind with the categories or the actual interior cognition for our org and the purpose that we're trying to support. So how do you convince your boss that finding what people value is going to be valuable to the org? And it's a simple question. If you provide a solution that actually levels up their success, it allows them to do something in a way that's slightly better than the way they've been doing it now, then they'll reach for it. But if it isn't slightly better, they're just going to go back to the way they usually address it. And if they reach for it, they'll pay for it. And that is important to your boss. So the idea, though, is that you have to know their thinking to be able to measure the value. So what we do is below each tower, we measure how well a capability supports each thinking style in that tower. We use our evaluative research. We frame those studies in a slightly different way so that we can get some data points, and then we make improvements. And then we end up increasing the number of people that the org supports strongly. So let me give you a little visual glimpse of this. This is a block from a study about cotton farmers who are adopting best practices regarding the soil given climate change. They are very interested in supporting their soil, and they are smart. And there were 3 thinking styles across this particular block. You can see 3 different colors. And that one tower that's sticking up in red has 2 of the thinking styles in it. The towers feel frustrated when the tech leaves me stranded, which is a focus of mental attention around, I'm using this tech and it died. So what do I do? And if we zoom out a little bit, we can see that the only things that sort of kind of aligned underneath this tower was finance for weed control and satellite connection to farm on and off farm and dealers training to give customer support. So these are obviously very weak support for what's going on in here. And so what we did was we did usability. We were measuring then how well each of these 2 thinking styles were supported by the dealers training, that last one down there, as we need to measure it for each of these capabilities that are aligned underneath here. And we plotted those points. Here you see the whole the whole mental model diagram with the opportunities. So we call it an opportunity map. And where the arrows are, you can see that one of those points that's underneath our tower that we were looking at is strong support for one of the thinking styles. And the pink arrow is pointing to the red dot where the support for the other thinking style is actually harmful. It's lasting harm. So we're strongly supporting one thinking style, but we're doing lasting harm to the other. So I've made some words so that we can talk about this a little bit better with our teams. I have a scale here, a harm scale, and it goes from mild to serious to lasting to systemic. And under mild harm, we've got frustration and confusion and I don't like that color, the typical things that we're finding when we're looking at usability. But if you look in serious, we've got interruption. We've got, the time that you've wasted trying to do something according to the way that people wanted you to do it, the manufacturers of that app. Or like, I'm not welcome here, or you've actually blocked me from coming in here because I think in a different way. Or I've got self-doubt or misleading information or shame. How many of us have actually looked for this in our data? It doesn't necessarily come up, or it'll come up anecdotally, and none of our stakeholders will pay attention to it. So now we have a way to actually show scale of it. So if the thinking style that is being harmed is pretty great, greater than the other thinking style that's being supported strongly, then you have an argument. In lasting harm, we've got things like diminished reputation, lost work, lost relationships, things you're never getting back, being subject to hatred or threats, or even being injured or killed, like the car interfaces might be able to do. And then we move into systemic, and systemic is something that's baked into our governments, it's baked into our judicial systems, it's baked into our culture, it's baked into our culture at work. And it's inequality of, say, salary, it's inequality of opportunity to move up in the hierarchy. So what's happening is that now we've got words to talk about this. I'm working with Lisa Dance, and she is a social impact speaker. And what she's saying is, hey, listen, when we come at things with a tech-first approach, faster, easier, more scalable, and we cause lasting harm, we end up making that lasting harm part of the system. It becomes more systemic. And so tech first assumptions about value are like really making things worse. Augusto.
Yay. So don't judge me on my Figma skills. That is my drawing, actually. uh, but what I wanted to say here is that harm is such a hard concept to swallow because we are problem solvers, right? We are designers. We are here to solve some issue, to support somebody else. And what I wanted to do here is to break it down with a simple example so that we can actually see what we mean by harm. So in this example that I made, we have an initiative that can be a startup or can be, just a group of friends trying to build something together. And they decide to create a food delivery service of excellence here in Zurich. And the excellence has to do with being faster than anybody else in the market, right? And so while setting this startup, they say, well, a success metric for us would be to be able to cope with the demand that we see we will have, right? So how about we have 1% of each Zurich district registered as a driver? So that is a metric for us. That is what we are aiming for. We are going to be recruiting and advertising that we have jobs up until the point that we cover that quota so that we can cope with the demand, that we can serve everybody asking for a pizza in time and faster than anybody else, right? So what can be potential harms around this situation? Because as you can see, it's very well intended. I mean, it seems like a very healthy business model, right? So if you think about the different people involved in the service, the people you are serving and the people involved with it, you have customers, you have the competition, and you have the drivers, right? So from a customer point of view, you might feel frustrated if you don't know whether these vehicles actually are green or not, whether if you're asking for a pizza delivery, you are going to be contributing to, I don't know, the next heat wave hitting Switzerland, right? From another point of view, from a point of view of the competitors, it might be the case that they experience lasting harm because they lose money. And how is that? Well, maybe the competitor is a company that is actually supporting the local community, supporting the city. And these well-intended guys don't intend to do so, right? So that would be, again, introducing harm with the business model we are trying to create. And then I just came up with another example of harm, which is a bit more serious, a systemic harm example, in which we are talking about inequality of opportunity. Because if we just define a quota per district for the drivers that we want to hire, we might be leaving some people outside, right? So there might be drivers that are super well intended and willing to, work the extra mile to provide to their families. But then, since you have completed your quota, you are not hiring them and you are not giving them the opportunity. So now that we see an example of harm, and even though coming from a well-intended place, just not being aware of that, the question here is how do we convince our teams to make time to understand this and to make time to listen to people?
Indeed. I just heard that the European government has set up some sort of reporting that needs to happen. So maybe it's the government that will help convince the team. They're going to ask everybody in business to report on their impact on society, on community, and on the environment. I think in the next year or two, that's going to end up happening. So I was excited to hear that. Maybe we'll have more power here. But if that doesn't actually start quickly, then what we might need to do is convince our own boss. And so to do that, we are up against kind of this little monster that exists in our organization where it's like, yeah, just go, make a guess, meet your KPIs. And so what's happening is that KPIs are just ways of measuring our own org's goals. They keep us thinking from our own perspective. They keep us within the lens of the solution. So in the solution space, we have, whatever, double diamonds, we have these cycles of ideas and prototypes and validation and product backlog and all of that. But it is all focused on the solution. Even the ideas, those are not problem space. Those are solution space because those ideas are solutions. And if we continue making our ideas based on hunches, then we're continuing the cycle of looking through our own perspective, and we're going to make things more systemically worse. So what if we headed up our ideas by some sort of a strategy space? Now, we already have strategy at our org. What I'm asking is that we add to our strategy space an opportunity map. We do gap analysis. We do help harm measurements from the person's purpose point of view. And so instead of, or in addition to KPIs, we can have some sort of value to people measurements where we're measuring it the way that I showed you. And yes, we're gathering some research for this, and the research takes maybe 2 months to pull together at the largest, but you don't do that research very often because this is strategic research and people's interior cognition does not change that quickly. So we're not doing it over and over again. So you could convince your boss with the classics, like if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. You don't even know about it. Or you can talk to them about other orgs who have been doing this for the last 2 decades. There are people in insurance and in finance, healthcare, universities, government, the United Nations. Here is they've got a couple of these, and this happens to be an opportunity map from the Prevention Web group that they've been using for the last decade. Or you could try one of these approaches because I talk to people a lot about how they actually convince people. And a lot of people will just go and do this under the radar. They'll do a little side project. It might take 6 months because they don't have, more than 1 day a week to work on it. But they then take the results and apply them and show it at some meetings. And that's been really mind-changing. There's another approach people use, which is to connect with an executive supporter who needs the metrics or wants to give you the budget and earn something out of it, maybe for a power play in some way. Or you can build relationships directly with the stakeholders who are balking at this. And when I say build relationships, I surely wish they taught this in university because it's important to being a member of an organization. It means sitting down and listening to all the other people and understanding their interior cognition, their emotional reactions, their guiding principles as they did things in the past. You will find things that you totally resonate with. And so instead of just throwing commands at each other, you will start to understand each other. When that stakeholder feels heard, they will start to listen to you. So listening deeply is the work of building relationships. And that brings us to the conclusion of our talk. Here is where to find more information. I have a lot of information, a lot of books. The latest one is Time to Listen. I have courses. One of the courses is Listening Deeply, and then I've got 2 courses about data synthesis, and I have 3 other courses about framing the study and about thinking styles and how to use opportunity maps, and then a bunch of free stuff on my website, indiyoung.com, as well as on Medium and where I am on the socials. So thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, Indi.
Yeah, so do we do questions now or?
Yes. Hi. That was really amazing. Like so much cool stuff in there. I'm a little bit blown away and overwhelmed. I have some questions, but can we can we step back to the beginning? I'm curious how you showed a question that you asked. is that kind of, you just ask the question and then kind
Yeah.
of let it go? Is that how it works? Like nuts and bolts?
Yeah.
You build on
Yeah. Nuts and bolts.
you build on top of what people are saying, so you don't come up with a list of questions that you want to check. This is not a verbal survey. This is actually the person unfolding their cognition, right? So you just have to be trained to be able to hold that conversation and continue to learn as they go and as they lead you, right?
And how do you know that they're actually telling you what they think and not just kind of spinning?
Yeah. So that's a part of the recruiting that we do. We do recruiting in a very different way. We're not just pulling random names. We need people who have done a lot of interior cognition about the purpose. So what we will do is we will find a bunch of candidates, and we do with each one of them an intro session. And the intro session serves two purposes. One is that it helps the potential participant figure out whether they want to participate in this, whether they trust you, right?
Yeah.
Because they're not going to tell you their interior cognition if there's not like some connection. That's why you have to have a little intro session. It also gives us the chance to see if they actually have done some thinking about this.
Right.
There have been great candidates on paper, but when we're chatting, they're either sort of faking it. They don't have any interior. Yeah. Or, we can tell in these intro sessions. So yeah, that's a different part. I've had people like at the Veterans Administration in the US, she's all like, we don't have time for this, but I'm going to try it anyway. And I'm going to write it up. So she did this write up of doing intro sessions before even making someone into a participant and then scheduling a listening session. She said, oh my gosh, when we got to the listening session, we were both so much better prepared. We had this warm connection. We trusted each other already. And the other person had time to do a little thinking, a little review about what their interior cognition was toward that purpose. Not all of us can relate it as we're thinking it. It takes a little while to digest. So that's the answer. And so this gal the gal at the VA, she's gonna do it all the time now. She's like, it made it so much better.
Cool. Did that opportunity map that you showed at the beginning, did that represent the cognition of several people, or was that one person?
Yeah. It was 20 people.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. We have a question here from Roland. How do we describe the work, quote unquote work, to sponsors when we suggest to invest less in tech/engineering?
Uh-oh. The microphone went out. I heard the first part of the question.
Let me try again. How do we describe the work to sponsors when we suggest to invest less in tech or engineering?
So we are facing a situation in which we are trying to invest less, and then we need to pitch for this. That's the question, right? Okay.
Right. Okay.
So yeah,
I would.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Augusto.
You go ahead first, Indi.
I was going to say, I wouldn't say invest less. I would say, divert some of the funds into understanding a person's purpose and build that mindset. I mean, even just that mindset shift to understanding people and their purpose rather than just looking through the solution lens will really make a difference. Augusto?
Yeah, my take would be to talk about opportunities. I see so many projects trying to improve on small iterations and just build on top of whatever we have already. And this is broadening the scope of what we understand people need, and then being able to address those opportunities from a business standpoint, right? So I think that would also speak to the people who are in charge of the budget.
So much great stuff to talk about. Thank you both very much for being here today. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you, guys.
Indi and Augusto.